The United States has debt, a lot of it in fact, $22 trillion as of February 2019. Now to ordinary people, $22 trillion sounds like a lot of money, and there are several videos, politicians, and voters that freak out about this number. How's the United States ever supposed to pay back all of its debt? Answer: we don't really have to. There's a lot of misinformation about how bad the debt crisis really is. Some think that high federal debt means that the government will stop operating and that our financial system will collapse. But the truth is, federal debt does not currently affect the everyday lives of Americans, nor does it affect the functionality of the federal government. The national debt of the United States, that raw number of $22 trillion, does not actually matter that much. What matters more is our ability to pay it off. In the 2018 fiscal year, the United States federal government spent $4.107 trillion. In decreasing order of cost, it was spent on Health and Human Services, which includes Medicare and Medicaid and these agencies, Social Security, which makes sure that old people don't starve, the military, which protects America, the Treasury, which collects taxes and distributes money, Veterans Affairs, which protects the people who protected America, Agriculture, which also makes sure that the poorest of Americans don't starve, the Office of Personnel Management, or as you might call them, Human Resources, Transportation, which ensures the safety of the traffic in the air and on the ground, Homeland Security, Education, Housing, the Department of Labor, which also pays your unemployment checks, the Department of Justice, who your friendly FBI man works for, Energy, Foreign Policy, Foreign Aid, NASA, the Department of the Interior, which manages tribal lands, parks, and other federal land, the Department of Commerce, and the EPA. Another 2.1% is spent on other stuff like paying congressional staff, the White House, funding federal courts, and other smaller agencies like the National Science Foundation. Now there's one secret federal program that takes up $350 billion of the US budget. What is it? Top secret funding to stop Naruto runners in Area 51? Chemtrails? The Illuminati? We'll come back to this last sliver of the pie later. But keep this 8% in your mind. Now, in 2018, the government took in $3.33 trillion in taxes, but spent $4.107 trillion, which meant that the federal government had to borrow money to pay for it. How does the US borrow money? When Congress and the president agree on a budget where the amount they spend is higher than the amount they take in, the difference between the money that is spent and the money that we receive is known as deficit. This means that the US has to borrow the difference, and in 2018 this was $779 billion. The US Treasury Department borrows money by selling bonds to other people. These are basically pieces of paper that say after a number of years, the government will pay back all the money you gave them plus some interest. The government pays the owner of the bond interest every year and then buys back the bond at the end of those years for the amount that the owner loaned to them. Now, who actually buys most of these bonds? China, right? Wrong. According to the most recent reports, the vast majority of these bonds are owned by American investors, the federal government, and the Federal Reserve. The reason why our government would borrow money from itself is a story for another time, but what you need to know now is that most US debt isn't owned by China. Every year, the United States pays interest on all the bonds currently still in the market and buys back the bonds that have matured. The government does this because 1. The United States government is constitutionally obligated to do so, and 2. Defaulting on debt would mean a loss of trust in the American government and financial institutions. So every year when you see a pie chart of the federal budget, there's always this number, net interest on the debt. That means in 2018, the US spent about 8% of its budget just to buy back bonds or pay interest on those bonds. This is the real number that Americans should care about because that's the amount that will affect how much the government is able to spend every year. Almost every debate about the debt focuses on the raw number of $22 trillion rather than the bigger picture of how much of the federal budget goes towards buying back bonds. The truth is, while the debt gets larger and larger, so does our economy, which increases government revenue. As long as money spent by the government grows the economy, the US will not be in danger of default anytime soon. If all of this is still confusing, here's an analogy. Say you wanted to buy a house and had to take out a mortgage to do so. What matters isn't the total amount of money that you borrowed, rather it's your ability to make monthly payments on that mortgage. Now, if you take out a loan to get better job training and get a higher paycheck, then it doesn't matter if you owe more money because you still make enough money to cover the higher payments. Debt is only really a threat to the US economy because we make it a threat. When politicians in Congress believe that we've spent too much money, they try to stop this reckless spending by refusing to authorize spending bills to pay for services that Americans need. This leads to a government shutdown where workers don't get paid, airports shut down due to unsafe air traffic, and the government creeps ever closer towards default. And that's how the federal government operates. So long as the government receives more money in taxes than it has to pay off, the government will not default. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, comment for what you'd like to learn next, and subscribe so you can vote in an upcoming poll on what my next video should be about.